Hello and welcome to Postgres FM, a weekly show about all things PostgreSQL. I'm Michael, founder of PG Mustard, and this is my co-host Nikolai, founder of Postgres AI. Hey Nikolai, what are we talking about today?
Hi Michael, your turn, you tell me. But don't choose boring topics, please.
Guilty. So today I have chosen auditing. I decided you claimed the last topic I chose was boring, so I thought I'd go for the absolute most boring topic I could imagine. But on the flip side, I actually think this is quite commonly needed. Not for everybody, not in all cases, but it comes up often enough. And we've had 2 listener requests for this now.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to see these starting to kind of cluster into things people are interested in. So yeah, auditing, and by that we mean, well, I guess it can cover a few different use cases, but specifically the things people seem to be interested in are the different options they have for seeing who's changed what and when. These fall into a few different categories, but we have a couple of really common options in Postgres and a couple of interesting options.
Before we discuss options, let me tell you that I consider this topic even more boring than transaction ID wrap around 2 weeks ago, because it's related to security. Due to my professional activities, I must deal with a lot of security and auditing and other things all the time, compliance. But I don't like it, and I like to build something. But when we can consider building auditing system, right? So this is entertaining to consider options. But in general, security not my favorite topic. So my opinions might be not advanced, because I sometimes try to avoid it and use other people's help. So don't listen to me if I can be wrong as well, and so on.
Well, and I think probably the transition into the options, I think a lot of the development in this area has been out of necessity, people needing this, not out of passion, not out of, wanting to contribute to open source or anything like that.
Requirements. If you are a big company, you thinking about IPO, you already might have requirements from external auditors, or it's or compliance, various compliance processes.
Yeah, if you're in a regulated industry, perhaps there's all of those things. But even and this is people also want to use these same solutions sometimes for feature-based things, but they tend to be on the less interesting side. So I can see why there aren't maybe loads of projects around this from hobby developers.
Right. So I think if you are a smaller company, a smaller project, but you think in the future it might happen with you, or some requirements may arise in the future, so not yet, or already you have them, I recommend checking Crunchdata document they prepared with United States Defense Information System Agency. So it's Security Technical Implementation Guide, STIG. It's full of it's like huge list of various items, requirements basically. Each requirement has a severity level, and so you can start with most important ones, critical ones, and it's impressive. So if you want to reach good level, it's a good document to check and maybe to use. But in general, I agree with you. Sometimes we implement this as a feature. For example, if you implement trigger-based auditing, it can be also your way to restore data, right? So if you save old value when someone deletes something, it's a way to restore it if needed, right? Manually restore some wrongly deleted parts of data. But if you switch to options, my recommendation is to draw a matrix. Three on horizontal, 3 vertical, so 3 cells, 9 cells overall. And it will help to understand the use case. and options and choose. First of all, there are three big types of events that can be logged or like remembered for auditing purposes. It's DDL changes, of course, right? Schema changes. Then DML in terms of modification of data, update, insert, delete, and copy. By the way, copy is not usually it's not reading. It can be reading to stdout or to file, but sometimes it's a massive data upload to database. And final third one is access of data using select, copy, or with statement also can. It's also like select.
Yeah.
So it's already interesting, these cases. And three basic big options are using logs, Postgres logs. You're right, Postgres logs. And then two options, I would call them, both are like logical level. So either triggers or logical decoding to send events to some places. And for selects, we can quickly exclude second and third option because we cannot see selects in triggers and we cannot see selects in logical decoding stream. In WAL, we don't have selects in WAL. Well, there are selects that can trigger some WAL writes, but it's different story.
Yeah.
In general, we should not think of that it's happening. So for selects, the only option is to use something like pgaudit, which is quite popular extension. Right.
Yeah. So on that note, yeah, the document you mentioned from Crunchy Data is incredibly impressive, but it's also incredibly long. I think it's 130 pages or something. And I did when they announced it, or when they announced the public version, they gave a shout out to pgaudit in it, and I did a quick search on the document, and pgaudit's mentioned about 140 times in a 135 page document. So that goes to show how important that is as an external, so as an extension, not as something that's part of Postgres core, to running Postgres, or in their opinion running Postgres in a very secure manner. So it's incredibly important, incredibly robust, and has a lot of development history by the team at EDB, or not EDB, Second Quadrant originally, who are now part of EDB, and the team at Crunchy Data as well, or at least one person there. So it does have real Postgres experts behind it, but it's not part of Postgres core, which is interesting.
Right, but the document is huge, but you can check only first the tip of the iceberg to take the most important items, and then go down to like main body and so on. So like to take it in steps, right? So it's possible because all items, as I said, they have properties of severity and so on, yeah. Criticality or something. So So I don't.
Sorry, go on. You go.
I don't like it's a big question. Do we need to take care of access of data, or we just need to track only data changes? Because in both requests from our listeners, the discussion was about data changes. Because if we need the access of data to log it, it's probably we should choose pgaudit or similar thing. We cannot do it on triggers.
Yeah, exactly. The more common use case I see is that you do only need to track the changes rather than access. But I don't see why. Accessing of data is one of the big security incidents these days, right? Somebody who shouldn't be reading a lot of data is a big issue. So I suspect that is why pgaudit is so popular. So yeah, just to recap on that.
If somebody shouldn't read some data, just revoke access from those parts of data for this user. That's it, and distinguish users. So, and check regularly that permissions are properly configured, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to log access to data which cannot be read by some database user because it's not possible.
Yeah. But even if they should have access to it, if they're doing an inordinate amount, like a not usual amount. If it's a support person who should be checking customer accounts.
This is, by the way, interesting. Yeah, I wish we had very simple way to log massive reads. Sometimes I think like we should, for example, have alerts if some massive reads is happening for some user, but how to do it? Probably, maybe even from PG statements, because it tracks selects as well, right? And it tracks it for a particular user as well, and so on and so on. So, and we have a number of blocks read there, right? So we can notice that some copy, for example, happened, and if we distinguish users, we can quickly see, okay, we have +1 in terms of calls for this query, for this user, and it has a lot of, or we can do it in logs, for example, even with auto-explain with buffers enabled. Well, it's something which seems to me quite common task, but not well solved, or maybe I don't know. As I said, my disclaimer in the beginning, I'm not an expert here at all. So.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to a very interesting topic, but probably not one we can, like, neither of us necessarily know how. But the PG audit is very much in that log category, right? There's the only way of doing things is via logging. It's highly customizable, but by default, it does log a lot. So it needs to be customized, basically. The other, like, I see people using triggers quite a lot for different use cases, not necessarily the security ones, but I don't see much of the third option you mentioned. So I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Logically, let's. I don't want to forget to mention it. With PG Audit, we have an issue, by the way. Maybe it's not common, but I see it obvious issue, and I had in my practice this issue triggering. So, PG Audit is logging everything to Postgres log, everything what is configured, and only super user can change settings, of course, right? So regular users cannot change settings. But what if we want to audit all actions of our DBAs, for example, which is quite common task? If DBAs usually have super users, they need it, and they can override settings.
Yeah. Well, this is another thing for security, right? Like, if you're doing this for security, what are the loopholes? What's your exposure to with each of these? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer.
You might have alerts configured for each set happened. This is one way. So if someone decided to override it, it's very visible to other people. Or you might want an alarm.
Yeah.
Yes, or there's an interesting small extension from OnGres called noSet, and it disables setting particular settings. Just you cannot change them without changing configuration. So it's also an interesting approach. I know about this extension. I never used it, but I think maybe it's something that Postgres should have. For example, prohibiting changing of statement timeout. It's a different story, but still. Or prohibiting changing of PG audit settings completely. It would be good. It would be good, a nice feature in the engine, in the core. What do you think?
But it has to be changeable by somebody, right? Like, you have to be able to configure it.
Well, change it in config, send SIG-hub signal or restart server, and if it's something that you don't want to let, for example, in some cases, 1 hour ago I reviewed Ansible playbook for major upgrade of Postgres based on first we switch from physical to logical, and then we upgrade Postgres, and we want old cluster to set it like read-only state. So there is an option, there is a setting, GUC setting, I don't remember, transaction default read-only, something like that. I always forget setting names. And you can set it in configuration, so on the primary, so it won't accept read-write queries at all. But unfortunately, any user can change it and still insert something to old cluster. And that's not good. I would have no set there and prohibit it. So only if you have access to files, you can change it. I don't know. Like it's maybe additional topic here, right? But I see some problem here with PG audit as well, right? And
well,
indeed,
similar problem with triggers, right? Like if people can remove them or disable them for a while.
Well, in this case, we should have DDL logged, but yeah, we can first set. We can set the log statement to like none, and but it should be alerted. Who decided to keep silence and do some bad things, right? So before we switch to triggers, one thing to mention about logging overall in general, I don't like dealing with logs at all, because to do it properly, if you have many servers, you need centralized storage with a lot of power. And the best system I was dealing with it's Splunk, but you need a lot of money to because it's commercial software, so it's like a huge system. Usually people use Kibana, and it's not perfect interface, so like many things, and you need to think about a lot of stuff, so like PII also, and so on and so on. But in general, if you consider PG audit, you need to think what you will do with a lot of logs. And also, of course, in current Postgres implementation, it may be bottleneck in terms of performance, especially if you forget to have a good disk where you store logs. Sometimes it's some magnetic disk. It's good for sequential writes, actually, but also if, in terms of IOPS, you may hit some ceilings. So dealing with logs, it's not big fun.
And I think the advice I've seen, which seems sensible, is only log what you have to. I think some people are tempted to turn it on and log everything. That feels like really bad. Genuinely, I've reading, like researching for this, I've seen several blog posts that say it's fine, and I just don't agree. No,
you can test it easily. Just create PGBench database with 100 million rows or something, and then just run unlimited TPS regular setting. Don't use -r, capital R, and compare it with log statement all. You will see a huge drop in TPS.
Yeah.
A very big drop. And then try to configure logging collector, compare it. Also interesting thing. So if logs go through syslog, journald, something, it can be a very big limiting factor. I don't know current systems, but I explored it like 4 years ago and found that if you use syslog, it might be a problem. Might be like performance may be limited there in syslog itself.
Interesting.
So if you enable a lot of logging, you probably should configure logging collector and check throughput, ensure that everything is fine, and you will have capacity for it. So capacity planning needed here, definitely.
Yeah, whichever option you go with, definitely. Like even on the trigger side as well, right? I saw some. Anyway, but I saw some advice that put some numbers to it. But if you have a write heavy table,
right amplification happens if you go with triggers. I like triggers because they give you flexibility, and also you deal with SQL all the time, so you can check what you have inside your database. You don't need to go outside, because dealing with logs means dealing with either Kibana or a lot of shell scripting, awk, and so on, like a lot of such stuff. But dealing with SQL, it's good, like a lot of data. Maybe we have timescale there, it's partitioned, we insert and store a lot, great. But of course, it has right amplification, because if you, for example, before you wrote a kilobyte, now you write probably a couple of kilobytes instead of one, right?
Yeah.
And deletes, you delete it, then vacuum cleaned up the tuples. But if you need to keep all data, it's kept in database, so database only grows. But as I've said, the good thing here that it gives you an option to restore. And old Postgres guys like to recall that originally Postgres had time travel in core. it was removed. So MVCC was implemented using some time travel feature. So when you deleted, the data was present, and you could jump to the past, to a point in the past. But now
it was removed for performance reasons, I believe.
Right. But it's so easy to implement it. And a few days ago, we had discussion with Hanno Krossing and Peter Zaitsev. Peter Zaitsev raised this topic, mentioning that it should be easy to set up this like shadow table, probably, which keeps all deleted data, or maybe also old versions of if you update data. But it's actually like 10 lines of code, because you can use JSON to convert everything to one line. You don't think about schema. So easy. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think I saw the conversation, and I think Peter's suggestion seemed to be for UX reasons. For, as a user, I'd like to be able to specify this, and maybe for a time limited period. I think it was like for 30. Can we keep the history for 30 days, for example? It's rare that you get a.
That's interesting to have some cleanup process. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. If you don't have to keep it forever, which I think was the original design, then I imagine some of those trade-offs become less bad. But probably a different topic. We've had a request for that one as well, actually, temporal.
That's interesting topic. But if we don't think about retention and some complex capabilities here, we talk about a couple of lines versus 10 lines or 20 lines of code. It's like not a big deal, and it's quite good question for DBA interview, right? A trigger which will can be attached to any table, and it stores data which was deleted, so we can always know when it was deleted, who deleted it, which user. It's also possible, and if needed, we have some procedure to restore it with a couple of actions. So it should be easy to restore it. So. Not a big problem, and we can use the same approach for auditing. So triggers write old data, new data, who did it, when it happened. But one thing here in terms of performance, usually most articles I saw, they talk about triggers for each row, but for this task probably it's better to work for each statement. And since we have transition tables, we access all data, new data, so we can save here in terms of overhead. So it can be easier for Postgres to save everything in one query, actually, additional query from trigger.
And based on the blog post you sent me, I think that was added in version 10, so everyone should have that now, because everybody's on the supported version of Postgres.
It's a very old feature already. Time flies.
Yeah. So some of these blog posts were from even older. Like I think one of them was, so that was 2017, right? 5 years ago, roughly. 2007, I saw one of the ones around one of the trigger-based solutions. So we do have, so that must have been for each
This
row.
is probably around the time when I first wrote it myself for some project.
Yeah. But that's a good, interesting point about implementation. Another big thing that seemed to come up time and again, some people doing, a lot of people implementing this in the simplest way they could. So trying to do a single audit table for all tables. Now there are trade-offs, obviously, depending on exactly what you're trying to do. But it is interesting how simple this could be. And you can do it. You can roll your own extremely easily. There are some people bundling up. I saw Supabase bundled it as an extension recently. Super Audit, I think they called it. So that's really cool. That's a freely licensed, as everything they do is. Yeah. Oh, and worth noting, PG Audit is Postgres licensed, so it's really cool. That's available to everybody.
Well, I don't see big problems with single table approach. I know we will attach the beautiful article from Cybertech with a table with comparison, and it says for single audit table it has write amplification and also in cons column, and also audit search queries might need some JSON skills. Yes, but I don't see the difference with multiple tables here, because if you, for example, have additional column in this audit table, you can put their relation name, right, and have an index on it. So it may be you may not see a difference between dealing with multiple tables or single table. And of course, this table, in my opinion, should be, for large systems, should be partitioned.
Yeah.
And if you have timescale, you can control what to do with old partitions, old chunks, they call chunks, right? So a lot of things to do. So I think this is perfect, actually, use case for timescale. I wonder if they already have a blog post about it.
I didn't see one, but yeah, it would make sense. Yeah. The in the Supabase one, they mentioned
time series, right? We have event exactly. of data change. We have timestamp who did it, and perfect.
It's append only by definition, right? You shouldn't be deleting things out of an audit log, like it's
right. But you can compress older and so on.
The Cybertech table is great. I do see their point on if you don't want to add columns, if the whole point of a single table for all is that you don't want to don't want to change the schema of that for each one, then I do think I do see the advantages if you're using it for, like, if you want to index individual columns and not have to worry about like the issues with GIN indexes, for example.
Well, I made this mistake. I had a couple of systems at least where these shadow tables were individual for each table we want to track for deletes. But it was not for audit. It was for data recovery purposes. And it was actually not convenient because each time you change schema, you need to change schema for shadow table as well. So yeah. I even thought about having event trigger trying to help me not to forget, and engineers not to forget about shadow tables.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it depends. It may be convenient in some cases, but these days I would definitely prefer JSON and maximum flexibility, fully independent of schema. I don't see any issues with if I need an index, I can use GIN index, or I can have B-tree indexes for specific paths in JSON. If needed also, like, it's not different from having everything in separate column and like in repeating, mirroring schema of original table and then indexes. I don't see it's a big problem at all. And JSON is beautiful, so I would go this path here.
Cool. Oh, while we're on the tangent, there was a really good blog post by somebody.
Let me praise a little bit timescale.
Yeah.
A few days ago, I was reading about their bottomless approach. I really liked it. It's only for cloud for their cloud offering, so you can decide what to do with old data, and it can go to S3. So bottomless. Interesting. And in this case, you can implement this auditing, and data goes to S3 for like lower cost storage and so on. It's like bottomless Postgres, you know. And also,
super interesting when you have such a specific use case and you know that old data is not going to be accessed as often and performance on it doesn't matter as much. It's really cool.
And off topic, I also was researching what people do with branching and Neon and so on and plain scale, and I Googled something and made mistake. I wrote bottomless branching with U, not branching, but branching.
Branching.
And there is such thing as bottomless branch, you know.
Normally that involves a lot of alcohol, right? So,
yeah. So bottomless mimosas and so on. So a lot of we can make some memes here, definitely.
Oh goodness!
About these new cloud versions of Postgres.
Yeah. Speaking of which, the two big options I see compared all the time are logging via PG Audit, very very scalable, very customizable,
and it's available almost everywhere. So all cloud. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. If everyone I checked supported it,
I would say.
Yeah. Every cloud, all of their managed services all supported it. But if you want, you can implement something via triggers. If the trade-offs are okay for you, it can be really simple, much easier to do per object, but equally you don't have to. And then there's the third. I want to make sure, while we're on the cloud topic, it feels like that's what it feels to me like that's what's driving this. Maybe alternative logical approach.
Right. So logical, based on logical replication or logical decoding, and you send events to either different Postgres, maybe with timescale. Maybe it's this Hydra new Postgres, which is open source Snowflake. We can attach links to Postgres TV episodes about it, right? Or it can be something like Snowflake or ClickHouse or anything like Vertica, what you have there. Or, I don't know, like Bigtable, Redshift, anything, right? Or maybe even not SQL at all. Many opportunities here. And good thing is there is no right amplification, but bad things, you cannot use logical on secondary. You don't need it because we already discussed that selects are not possible to track, so it's only about data changes. But the use of logical slots can happen only on primary, and it has some risks, of course. So like out of disk space. Fortunately, fresher version of Postgres, the newest version of Postgres, I think it was added to 15 or 14, I don't remember. You can specify the maximum threshold for slot size, so you are protected here. All right, and of course, setup is complex, but a lot of flexibility, and there is no write amplifications. Almost, there is a small overhead of writing additional data to walls. So you should have, there are limitations. So for example, you should have primary keys, maybe not, by the way, for the sake of auditing. Anyway, so a lot of interesting things. Also interesting that if we talk about PG audit, if you check documentation, they immediately say why it's better to use PG audit. Because, for example, if you have dynamic SQL and you accessed or changed something in table which name is created dynamically, so consisting from several parts, normally with log statement equals all or log maturation statement zero, timeout zero, you log maturation statement, no timeout. I always said it. So you have
log everything.
You cannot grep then or search, but with PG audit you have normal relation name you can search. And if we talk about logical decoding, some things probably everything is there, right? So user is there, right? Everything is there. You can decode and know when, who did what. Except selects, of course. So data modifications, DDL, everything is there.
Question: it seems, does it have that same downside you mentioned as shadow tables? I'm cheating and using the Cybertech, the excellent table they have, but they've got typically requires some schema changes and extra care when the schema evolves.
Well, if you have schema changes, if you use logical replication, each schema change will break it.
Yeah.
In current version of Postgres, there is ongoing work to improve this, but like destination schema should match publisher schema should match subscriber schema, right? And if you use this, you need to take care of DDL, and for example, in PGLogical there is a special function which you need to use as a wrapper for all your DDL. So there are limitations here, definitely. So you are right.
But it's an interesting area. I very much credit the Cybertech team for that. But yeah, it's super interesting. It feels like we've got a few really good options. And depending on our use case, we can hopefully, it'd be very surprising if one of those doesn't work on some level. So hopefully that's given people plenty to think about. I did have one slightly less serious question for you. Have you seen the PG Audit logo?
No, I mean I'm sure I saw it, but what's about it?
I don't know. I can't really work it out. I think it's just got like a golf visor on the Postgres element.
Let me check it.
Is that what audit people wear?
Okay. It has green. Yeah. I'm not sure. Never thought about it.
So weird. But yeah, it made me think. It
doesn't look serious, right? It's a serious extension with not serious at all logo.
Extremely.
Before we finish, let me put the fourth option on the table, which I think will be winning. So imagine if we can observe all queries on the server, not installing triggers, not writing anything to log, and send them to somewhere like log collector or using UDP to different servers. Somehow we can send everything, all details about each query executed and even not finished. We can send information about the query which is already just started. Of course, we could do it observing pgset activity, but it has limited query. By default, it's column length.
Like 5,000 characters or something.
1,024 by default. Track activity size, I always don't remember, but not limited. So here we can see everything, and we just do it, right? And we can send it, and everything comes almost for free. Imagine such approach. It's possible with modern Linux, and it's called eBPF.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, we had a couple of episodes recently on Postgres TV about this particular thing, but it was about monitoring and query performance troubleshooting, so observability. But nobody prevents from using this exactly approach for auditing purposes. And I think it has obvious pros. And cons is complexity, so you need to write and deal with it. But it can be very, very low overhead, because we don't need to sample it. We don't need to go to execution plan here. We just need information about query with parameters, who did it, that's it. It can be about selects, right?
There's some of the same downsides that PG audits solve. In the PG, I know it's a very contrived example, but I would guess it, for example, the piping of the object name together in the PG audit README. I guess that would have the same problem.
You're right. You're right.
But other than that, it does sound really interesting.
Yes, and Postgres log, it's a single file, and yes, quite there is lack of flexibility in maintaining that file, and of course overhead to writing it to disk. Yeah. Here we can use network and send this somewhere and filter and so on. But you're right in terms of dynamic SQL, yes.
But yeah, it doesn't I don't know enough to know how common or how often that is an issue. Go on.
Actually, probably we can extract relations somewhere. Worth checking. Maybe. I think it's possible to extract relations and to have additional tags, what objects or database objects involved, users, which user initiated it, and so on. So I wouldn't.
That might solve it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not aware of any work in this direction, and I just came with this idea 10 minutes before we started. So it's a fresh idea.
Nice.
But I think I'm quite sure many people already thought about it. It's obvious. And eBPF is the future of observability, so maybe it will be future of auditing as well.
Well, it'd be exciting if me forcing you to talk about a boring subject actually comes to some good.
Well, it's about building something, so it's becoming interesting.
Of course. Awesome. Well, I think anything else? Any last comments or thoughts?
No, I think that's it.
Nice one. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Nikolai. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye. See you.